point in the workshop where we've gone over what PCA is and kind of what the objectives are, and discussed a lot about positivity versus negativity, and that positivity is much better. Negativity doesn't work. And we've also gone through the 2 of the 3 double goal coaching principles. Number 1 being what? Anybody?
Filling the tank, the gas tank thing.
The gas tank, the emotional tank, correct. Okay, and that's the whole idea of the athletes needing to connect and be part of something. Okay, and then the second principle that we went over was
Elm tree.
Exactly, and this is where they learned that effort means something, and that we reward effort, whether successful or unsuccessful. And finally, that they can make mistakes and learn from them, which is such a key part of the whole thing. And the third principle is honor the game, is what we call it. And this really is the foundation for what I like to refer to as actually competing. Actually get on a court, a field, whatever it happens to be, and actually getting after it and compete with a scoreboard and the whole bit. And this is the foundation for players, coaches, and parents to compete with some integrity and what I like to refer to as civility. If I were to say integrity, what pops in your head?
Honesty.
Okay, honesty, good point. Yeah.
Doing the right thing, good values and morals.
Okay, cool. Anything else?
Following the rules.
Ah, excellent, excellent, excellent. What else? Anything? Civility. What does civility mean to you all? Versus integrity.
Civility?
Yeah.
Civility. Keeping a cool head.
Good point. Yeah, absolutely. I like to refer to it just to help. I know it's a little off the wall because in some ways it overlaps integrity just a little bit. I use it a lot in coaching and in teaching, quite honestly. That I'm just civil to you one-on-one. In today's society, I think that there's so much of the opposite that children hear today that I think sometimes it's good to emphasize that, we might have just knocked the heck out of each other, but I can still be civil with you and still communicate. Same thing with coaches, officials, the whole thing. And what honor the game means, it's the introduction to the PCA culture, i.e., the way we do things here, not necessarily the way you do things or somebody else does things, but the way we do here. And I think that there's a lot of successful teams, organizations for that matter, that have a unique culture. And it's not to say one culture is better than another. It's just what that team does in their gym or on their field or in their school. Yeah. And again, it all supports the better athletes, better people. And it's a little bit more than just sportsmanship. I know just the other day I was reading a sportsmanship list of things, and what stunned me was like the first 15 were don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. And I know from teaching, and about the third don't, the kids just tune you out. They're off the charts at that point, So what we're trying to do here is a list of things that takes, again, the positive approach. Here are the things we're going to do. And as a byproduct, many of the things that perhaps people meant well listing what we're not going to do really do, in fact, don't happen because we're emphasizing what we should do versus what we don't do. And the acronym we use is ROOTS. And we'll go through each of these one by one. Rules, got to have them. Okay. I was referred to the other day, rules. I remembered a story when I was a little kid. Growing up, we didn't have a lot of parks and stuff around. And on a Saturday morning, we got to play baseball. Well, there was only 5 of us. I lived in the country. Couldn't exactly get, 15 or 18 guys together to play baseball. But down the street, there was a tennis court. There were 2 courts with a concrete wall across the back. And so what we would do is we'd get in there and we'd paint our strike zone on the concrete wall to the chagrin of the people that ran the court. And we'd use tennis balls and a bat, a glove, the whole bit. And we wet the ball, so when you threw it, you know whether it was a ball or strike. So that was the rule. But we had to invent our rules. So our rules were, okay, if you hit it into the net, you're out. If you hit it over the net but didn't hit the back fence, that's a single. If you hit the back fence, that's a double, and on and on and on. If you hit it over the fence, which meant typically we lost the ball because there was a creek behind it, that was an out. But we invented our own rules because we had to have rules to play the game, no matter what it was. And sometimes we'd be creative with them. But nonetheless, that's what it was. Well, today, of course, we have written rules. Tons and tons and tons of written rules. Just out of curiosity, anybody in the room ever read their rule book? I mean, read it?
I did.
Yeah, it's enlightening, isn't it? Terminology can be a hang-up sometimes. One area I'd like to ask, have you ever been able to read the section on coach's demeanor in different sports handbooks, like lacrosse versus soccer or versus basketball or football. I did that last summer just for grins. I was at a high school game last year that really got out of control, and I was appalled at the demeanor of the coaching that was going on. It's good quality high school basketball. And what I was stunned at was how similar the words were between soccer and lacrosse. And they were the same. It was the same description. And yet what I witnessed was completely different demeanor of the coaches on the sidelines. So there must be those unwritten rules, in those sports. What's the unwritten rule? And we all know what they are. Some of them. Give me some examples. Like Ruben, you're a volleyball guy, right? What's an unwritten rule in volleyball?
An unwritten rule is that you don't try to convince the referee that they made the wrong call.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I know where you're going with that one. The old double. Every time a non-setter touches the ball, everybody in the gym yells double.
Yeah, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the unwritten rule is that when the ref makes a bad call, you try to convince them that they were wrong.
Yeah, good way to look at it. Yeah. Kelly, what about in lacrosse?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused. Like unwritten rule meaning things that the athletes should do or shouldn't do.
It's not in the rule book, but everybody does it because they believe they should do it.
Oh, I would say in lacrosse, it's, being overly dramatic when somebody makes a dangerous check, even when, if it's anywhere near the girl's head, even if it doesn't touch her, they'll go like this and they'll act like they got hit in the head when they really didn't.
Got it. I understand. So what we're looking for with PCA is to deal with the spirit and the intent of the rule. Yeah. Rules can't cover everything. We wish they could. There's some classic examples, of course, in basketball, the block and charge, one of the ultimate, difficult calls for any official to make, let alone interpret it. But there's another category of rules that I think don't get talked about very much when it comes to the competition side, but it's part of it, and it's rules off the field. And this applies specifically to those of you that are involved in a youth sports league, maybe versus a high school league, but even the high school league. A good example would be location. Public schools, quote, the kids within their geographic boundary go to that school. But most districts have an academic rule that says, if there's a course that you really want to take academically that's not offered at your school where you would go normally, you can transfer to another school. Well, the intent of that rule is an academic rule. Unfortunately, in many areas, that rule has been a convenient way for people to change schools to play basketball or soccer or lacrosse. In our area for a long, long time, when my kids were in high school, now probably 30 years ago, it was Chinese. There was one particular school that offered Chinese, and that's where all the good basketball players ended up because they wanted to take Chinese. So, and once again, it comes back to the culture thing. The way things are done here, just because somebody else does it doesn't imply that your school, the team culture that you have, that you do it. Okay, so that's the R. First O is opponents. Got to have them. Okay, and a great quote that's in the book, if you all have the book, is that we'd love for our opponents to be fierce and friendly. Yeah. This sort of is an area type of issue. If you're in a big metropolitan area like here in Northern Virginia, or perhaps in the Philadelphia area where Kelly, where you live, where there's so many different geographic areas now that it used to be you'd play against your friends a lot. You just happen to be on a different team. Today, we're playing against people from the other part of town or from another city down the road a little bit. And the issue of it's your opponent, not your enemy, becomes a bigger issue. At the youth level, many times it manifests itself in the sense of, from this town versus that town. In high school, of course, we get into the rival thing. And I know one of the things that I personally experienced when I first got into high school coaching was the degree to which rivalries had risen. Certainly when I was in high school back in the 60s in Alabama, we had rivals, that's for sure, absolutely. But again, if you knock somebody flat on their back in a football game, most likely after the whistle blew, you helped them up. And that was the way the game was played. Again, I was going to knock your head off. There was no doubt about that. But nonetheless, you weren't my enemy. Today, I think, unfortunately, because of so many youth sports has adopted the pro model, win at all costs, you're no longer just my rival. You are my enemy now. And all kinds of nonsense goes on, both on and off the field, unfortunately. But let me ask you this. From a coaching perspective, those of you that are coaches out there or beginning to be coaches, what's the most difficult game for you to coach from a generic standpoint? Is it your rival? Is it the team that's in first place? Is it the semifinal game of the conference championship? Or what is it? What's the most difficult game that you find year after year is hard to coach?
Well, for me, it was often when we played a team that we had beaten several times, and I was always worried the players expected to be able to show up and just win. Those games always made me edgy and irritable.
Yeah, irritable is a good one. I like that. Kelly, anything in particular?
Yeah, I was just thinking of this past season, and we have two schools that are our biggest rivals. One of them are really good players, the most respectful coaches. They really bring up our level because it's always a really tight game, and we have a lot of fun, and that gets us really fired up. And it's tough to coach because there's a lot on the line. Yeah. But on the other hand, there's another team that's our rival as well, and the coaches are very disrespectful, and the players are, they're dirty, and they just don't play well. And I think that's a really hard game to coach because we have to coach our girls through staying composed. So I think, the super high intensity games that are a positive thing are hard to coach. But I think the harder, I'm going to say definitely the harder one to coach is when you're playing against a team that definitely doesn't honor the game and you're trying to keep the, the composure of your players together.
Ironically, we have exactly the same situation this year. In fact, the team we beat, I mentioned before, for our volleyball championship this year, was the team that was very talented, had won, 5 or 6 titles in a row, but they were the ones that certainly didn't honor the game in any way, shape, or form. And afterwards, after the match, just to show you how hopefully you're doing the right thing once in a while, in the locker room after everything had died down and we were all in the locker room, chatting, and I asked, so what was the difference? Why we beat them this year versus lost 3 times in a row? And one of my little freshmen who barely played the entire season, she pipes up and she says, because they lost their cool and we didn't, Mm-hmm. And seniors went over and hugged her like, you got it. You figured it out. You're 14 years old and you already figured it out. One of the ones that I've always struggled with, and I think a lot of people do, are those blowout games, sort of similar to what you had mentioned, Ruben, not necessarily that you blow them out, but you knew you're going to beat them. I used to use the phrase, just show up, wear the right uniform, and you win. And personally, I've experienced this myself. When I was in high school, again, back in Alabama in the 60s, I was in the right place at the right time. We had a great group of athletes. We just never lost, in football and basketball. We won a couple state titles. And, I used to joke, I had no idea what the other locker room was like. No clue. I was kind of a tweener athlete. Well, not really a tweener, depending on who you asked. Wasn't going to play at any big time school. That wasn't going to happen. There wasn't a lot of demand for 5'9" guys like me. There was, certainly not in football in Alabama, that's for sure. So I ended up at a small college in Florida, relatively new athletic department. First season as a freshman, we went 5-25. I hadn't lost 25 games in 4 years of high school, total, complete, utter, and so early in the season, I was devastated, like, what in the heck's going on here? Fortunately, I had a very young coach whose name has escaped me over the years, who knew exactly what was going on. And he taught us how to compete independent of the scoreboard. And I look back on it, and I couldn't figure out how in the world did you coach us up to do that, but he did. It leads into a lot of the how do you prepare a team for that blow up on either side, the whole thing. And I learned how to compete against people that were far better than I was, and the scoreboard was irrelevant. That wasn't going to happen, so upsets just weren't going to happen. Okay. All right. So that's the first L. Second L on the roots. Officials. This is probably the number one gig for most people. This is the number one thing everybody sees these days. We're in what I refer to as the replay generation. To be honest with you, I'm not sure what's good or bad, but that's what it is. Just out of curiosity, anybody out there an official?
I've been one.
Been one?
Yeah.
What's the worst part of the job?
The worst part of the job, I guess getting yelled at.
By players, coaches, fans?
Usually adults. The kids usually,
Yeah.
It's usually adults,
Okay.
coaches, fans.
Well, we're losing a lot of officials. I happen to have a good friend who officiates basketball in this area, and he's pretty good. He gets into most of the big conference tournaments and everything. And we go out once in a while, have a beer, and he says over and over and over again, he said that it is without a doubt, the coaches and the fans, that it just never stops, never ends. And henceforth, we're losing a lot of officials. In fact, he's been trying to get me to coach the referee now for 3 or 4 years. I'm going, you're crazy. Not a chance am I going to do that. But here's my question for you. Do officials decide the outcome of games?
Sometimes I feel like they kind of do.
From what perspective? Yeah.
I don't know if they decide. I don't know if they decide. They might, but I think they do influence. I think they can have an influence on the outcome.
Certainly, in sense of kind of the way they're calling the game, that generic phrase.
Well, or just a critical call. I mean, if Kawhi Leonard has 5 fouls, and in the last quarter the official makes an incorrect foul call against him, and Kawhi Leonard has to leave the game, that could have a profound impact on the outcome.
Yeah. Sure. How would you? Let's say we're in the locker room afterwards, and that happened. Critical call, and the players are very upset. Your players are very upset about it. How might you go about explaining to them that, yes, the official made that call, but what could you have done as a player previous to that to perhaps either avoid it or put your team in a position to win despite the call?
Well, I got a couple ideas. One is you can ask them what we could have done so that call wouldn't have made a difference. 2 is we could have played so well that we could win without Kawhi Leonard because we know that bad calls or questionable calls do happen. So we're going to play well enough and so that we can overcome the calls when they happen to go against us. We don't tend to get very mad when the questionable calls go in our favor. But I mean, those might be some of the things that I would ask or talk about.
Sure. What role could the coach do? I'm reminded. I'm an old Bear Bryant kid, growing up again in Alabama in the '60s. And one of Bear Bryant's quotes that I will never forget was he said to a reporter one time that when our team wins, the players played well, and when our team loses, I didn't coach very well. And I've always felt. Let's take the Kawhi Leonard example. Maybe as a coach, I could say to the team, "Hey, I should have protected Kawhi better. I should have put him on a different player, somebody that didn't handle the ball a lot. I should have done this. I should have played zone for a few minutes to, reduce his opportunity to commit a foul." But I think the point is getting everybody to think about how could I have avoided it? How could I have overcome the bad call? Because they will happen. It's one of the things I know that coaches preach to players. It's going to happen. My friend that's the basketball official, he also officiates baseball, and he says, people don't realize that when I'm behind the plate, I'm making 250 to 300 decisions every game. So if I get 5 wrong, percentage-wise, that's awfully good, But his point's well taken. I think most players and fans don't really appreciate that, But nonetheless, the fan influence is significant on officials, and we are losing officials. And there's got to be some way, hopefully, to overcome that eventually. Because you're right, Ruben. The better the officials. A good example is volleyball. If a volleyball official keeps a nice pace on the game tends to be better played, rather than humongous delays, because of different issues, which the official in volleyball can really control, just the pace of the match, based on how quickly he continues to keep the play going. Okay, so we got 2 O's. Next, the T, teammates. This really gets into the issue of the PCA kind of mantra, better athletes, better people, If I were to ask you, and if somebody were to ask you, a potential player or a parent, what is a good teammate? What characteristics does a good teammate have? Let's say at the high school level.
Selfless. I think teammate puts others around them first.
Excellent. Absolutely. Makes the other guy better, you know.
Yeah, consistently gives a very good effort. I think a teammate that cares and is selfless, the kind of teammate you want to play with is one that you know is always going to give you a very good effort.
Without a doubt. I think also as a coach, I'm always looking for that player that is happy no matter who gets the recognition. My dad used to joke that he was mad at Alabama for many years when they put names on the back of their football jerseys, because that made it an individual thing versus a team thing. And I think a lot of times that teammate of saying of, yeah, I got your back. I know in high school, you go to school the next morning after a tough loss, and your teammate missed a free throw that could have won the game. Yeah, and you're in the hallway before school starts, and everybody's ragging on your teammate. What do you do? And I always tell them that's an example of stepping up for your teammate off the court. Saying, hey, but she played a great second quarter, and we did this in the third quarter. We shouldn't have been close to begin with. And again, that teammate thing is both on the court, off the court. And a friend of mine used to joke. He said that when his players walked in the gym, instantly you were everybody's best friend. In the gym. Outside the gym, yeah, would it be nice to be everybody's best friend? Sure. But that's just not reality. I know an example of mine in college one year. We had an incredibly talented baseball team. We had a lot of success. When we left the field, we went in 25 different directions. None of us were friends with each other off the field. But when we walked into that field, we were best buddies and backed each other up all the time. So it can go both ways. Okay? There's a great example of it. I don't know. I've never met him. There's a wonderful book called Every Teammate Matters that I would highly recommend if coaches are struggling trying to figure out ways to describe this and ways to deal with it. It was written by a guy named Alan Williams. He was a walk-on basketball player at Wake Forest a number of years ago. And it's an excellent book. I always have my captains read it every year. They complain about that, of course, like, oh, great, we get to read over the summer. Fantastic. Thanks, Coach. We really appreciate that. And inevitably they come back and say, wow, that was really worth it. And so I think that, but now a difficult scenario. The infamous best player, worst teammate model. What do you do? How do you deal with it? I think most of us have probably run into that over the years. I won't say worst teammate, but let's just say they're not a very good teammate. What do you do? How do you handle that? What do you do? Let's take a specific example. You're in a game, key game, and that good player calls out a teammate. Teammate makes a mistake on the floor, and the good player really makes it known to everybody in the gym that it was the other person's fault. What do you do as a coach?
I think you do the same thing as you would do whether they were your best player or not. I think getting to your previous question, how do you handle? You handle it the best player by holding them to the same standards that you hold all players to.
Good point. Excellent point. Good point. One way to understand that best player thing, or that even better, is just another example. I don't know how many out there have heard of Dr. Carol Dweck. I got hooked on her stuff about 7 or 8 years ago, and I wondered how I made it through the previous part of my life before I read her material. If you don't recognize the name, it's The Growth Mindset, which you probably recognize the name of the book. Huge bestseller. She is a member of the PCA board. Again, if you ever get a chance to listen to her talk, do. It's fascinating to listen to her, and the book does a lot of helping a coach understand this best player who in Dr. Dweck's world is most likely what she refers to as the fixed mindset player who believes that I'm good, I got great skills, I really don't have to worry about any of the other stuff. And the growth mindset player is the one that really is that great teammate that's willing to do whatever it takes for her team to be successful as well as for herself to improve. The best example I have of that personally was my very first year of coaching in high school. I was coaching girls basketball. And we were having tryouts, first tryouts I'd ever been involved in. And we're running laps. And all of a sudden, everybody was done, and I realized there's one player still on the court. And oh my goodness, I mean, she was 2 laps behind, and it was like, oh my gosh. So you got 50 kids standing there watching this one young lady run. Yeah, not a good scene. Yeah. And all of a sudden, behind me, this player runs by me. Turns out she was a senior, returning player, good player, and she ran the laps with her. It almost brought tears to your eyes, and I thought, my goodness gracious, this 17-year-old knows more about this than I do, and I will never forget that, that this kid understood that that's what it meant to be a good teammate. The girl didn't make the team, but it didn't matter. She made a friend, that's for sure. So, okay, finally, gets to the individual self. And this is real simple to say, very easy to do, of course, because of the age group of the people we're talking about, is self-respect, respecting yourself. Yeah. And it's one of those things, I think, that we used to define it. You've seen it on a lot of T-shirts. Discipline is what you do when nobody's watching. And I think the same thing relates to self-respect, that it's very, very difficult to do most of the other things we've talked about unless one does respect themselves. Yeah. And it does get back to the way we do things here. I was a physics teacher and a physics guy, and I've always joked that many people will claim that gravity is the most powerful force in the universe. Yeah. And I've always disagreed. No, it's peer pressure. And to ask a 14 or 15-year-old young athlete to resist that, it's asking a lot. Yeah. But it's so important because it trickles over into academics. It trickles over into everything. Yeah. And again, it gets back to the culture thing. It's the way we do things here. Yeah. The good news is this is all doable. As a coach, Roots is up to you. Totally. You are the person, the entity that can make Roots happen. Yeah. One more little bad call scenario, and this is one that there's a PowerPoint in the presentation that talks to this, and it's simply a close game. You got the other coach been riding the officials the entire game, never stops. Okay, and at the end of the game, that critical call comes up, Ruben, and guess what? They get the call. Yeah. So my question to you all, and again, if we were in a big workshop, I'd probably break people into groups to deal with this particular one. What do you do? How do you deal with it? How do you deal with it at the moment, afterwards, and what do you do personally? Let's just take the personal one first. What do you do as a coach? There's that one call that you know is wrong. You know it's a bad call. What do you do? How do you deal with it?
I think
in the moment.
Good.
You go first, Kelly.
I was going to say, I think in the moment, I just try to keep my head cool and try to remember that everybody's watching me and that I'm setting a really big example for how I want my players to act. So probably the first thing I do is take a really deep breath and just try to, keep my composure, stay calm. I might turn to my team and say, hey, you know what? The ref doesn't make the game. Let's play through it. Let's play harder. Just try to keep them moving forward. But personally, I would pull the ref aside if it's like a halftime or a timeout and just ask or question the call. But yeah, I've had this situation happen a lot, and the kids are all watching you. So you have to really be careful. And if you start getting upset, they'll get upset and they think it's okay.
Ruben.
Yeah. I really like what Kelly said. That's what I hope I will do most of the time. I know I don't always, but I would like to be that kind of coach that Kelly described. And I want to be in that moment. I want to be thinking clearly and in a level-headed way, because we still got a game to finish. And how can I help support my team's effort to win this game? And probably yelling at the ref is going to take me away from all the things that I could be doing to help my team in that moment.
All those are great points. I think that there's lots of tricks, obviously, to control yourself. I personally, I always do this, especially on the road. I'll find something in the gym, some stupid object, a sign, an advertisement. I don't know what it doesn't. An exit sign one time I used because it's the thing I could find. And when that happens, I find that object and I just look at it for just 2 seconds, and I associate that with knock it off, cool, go back and coach and get on with it. But Kelly, you mentioned that you are the role model in this scenario. You are it. And I think that, once the players see that, they recognize that, hey, the only thing I can do is go play the next point. That's what I can do. And I think that if we can get that point across to them, things are in the right straight. I think that the best story I have on this is a personal story. I'll make it quick. I was in high school playing a basketball game. The official made a call. I didn't exactly agree with it. And he decided that I should probably watch the rest of the game from the locker room, which, of course, made me even more upset. Yeah. Game ends. This is Alabama, 1963 or 4. Corporal punishment was still legal. The next thing I know is a guy tapping me on my back, on my shoulder, and it's the official. And he goes, "I'd like to talk to you in the hallway." I'm going, "Oh my goodness, here it goes." So I got in the hallway, and to this day, I wish I could remember this official's name because he had a dramatic effect on me. He said, "I'm going to make you a deal." He said, "I've thought about that call," and I said, "I think you're right. I blew it." Well, as a 16-year-old, I'm going, "Well, that's a lot of good doing me now. I'm the one that got thrown out." And he said, "And I'll tell you what. Here's the deal. The day you play a perfect game, you can expect me to call one." Yeah. I will admit it took me 3 or 4 weeks to kind of really understand exactly what this guy was trying to tell me. But I eventually figured it out with my dad's help. And I think everything that we've been talking about really is summarized in that, that they are part of the game. They are part of the gig. It's going to happen. Did he get influenced by the other coach ranting and raving in the scenario? Yeah, sure. We're all human. If nothing else, shut them up, give you the call. But I do think that, those scenarios happen frequently, and we have to be ready to deal with them as a coach. Okay, okay, almost there. Let's talk about culture for just a second. Okay, and we've talked about it, but PCA defines it as the way we do things here, not the way you do things, but the way we do things. And every team has a culture. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. We talked about that one team, Kelly, that good team, but had the bad culture, but that was their culture. That's what they dealt with. Has either of you ever taken over a team or a program that had a negative culture?
Yes.
Yes.
How'd you handle it?
Just one step at a time. Just taking every day was another life lesson to teach. We did it this season, and it was.
Oh wow.
There was a lot of things that the players would do automatically, and we would have to just call them out all the time. I felt like I was doing a lot more parenting than coaching for half the season, but yeah. It was important to set the tone and just to say, hey, and luckily I had the PCA background to say, hey, that's just not the way we do things on this team. And they said, well, that's what coach let us do last year. And I said, well, sorry, not this year. We're not gonna let you get away with that this year. Cool. So
they eventually bought in?
Yeah. I mean, the very first thing was just screaming at the freshmen for not carrying the water down fast enough, and you just catch them in it and you say, go back and help them. But I'm a senior, go back and help them, go back and grab the water with them. So they did. I think by the end of the season, they finally got it, and it was a great season. So
excellent.
I think they got it.
Ruben.
How did I handle taking over a team with a negative culture? Tried to set the tone for positivity right from the start, explaining to the players, the way we're going to do things here, and the principles that our program would follow. In some cases, and there were some situations where we got their input on how we were going to do certain things, and then just trying to reinforce it and uphold it, rewarding and praising the team and players when they did it the way we wanted to do it, and letting them know and having consequences for when we didn't do it that way.
Cool. Yeah, consequences are a big part, no argument. The last thing I'll mention with a culture for coaches out there that perhaps would like to really get an in-depth description of what culture in a program can be, I would highly recommend reading about the All Blacks rugby team from New Zealand. There was a reason. Well, there's been several books about them. There's a recent book a few years ago, and the number one thing that got to me from reading about them, I'd always heard about their success on the field, but I really had no insight into what their team culture really was, other than winning, which but they have a culture that they will never leave a locker room when they travel, which is most of their life. That's not cleaner than when they found it. A locker room, and it's a team thing. If you've ever read that book, I had to read it a couple of times to make sure I really understood what they did, and they are fanatical about it, but they believe firmly that that's part of their culture. That's what they believe, that this is the way we do things here, So at this point, by the way, I would show the Julie Foudy, the little video, the 1.5-minute video that she does. And I hadn't thought about it until actually this morning when I was reviewing this, just digressing just a second. I would probably also talk about, even though I haven't prepared anything, about just in the Washington Post a couple of days ago, there was a real in-depth interview with several of the Women's World Cup players right now. And the general theme was the influence on them of that 99 team. And it was really quite heartwarming to hear, and none of it had to do with soccer. None of their influence had to do with their skills, the score, none of it. It all had to do with the way they conducted themselves. And Julie, in this video, captures that part. So the highlight of the video, and again, what is significant to that from my perspective for coaches trying to learn how to follow the PCA model and become a good double goal coach, is that, and Kelly, you just mentioned some of it, there's no grunt work. No, everybody's the same. We're going to treat you the same. We want you on our team. Recognizing, and I don't think Julie mentions it, is that some of those new players are going to take playing time away from somebody. That's just the reality. And yet they're embracing them joining their team, i.e. the great teammates. Now, granted, we're talking about exceptional athletes at the very highest level, which many times brings along the biggest egos and the biggest issues about playing time. They all can play, or they wouldn't be there. So I think the fact that she also joked that on the field, yeah, we're going to kick you around. You're going to have to prove yourself on the field, but you're part of this. You're part of this team immediately. And I know in the high school world, those of you, the high school coaches, that's a tough one. Like at the varsity level, with young players on a varsity team, like a freshman on a varsity girls volleyball team, as an example. They have the skills to play, but my goodness gracious, they're in different social worlds with a 17 or 18-year-old senior. And so it's just important for the team to accept everybody and the fact everybody contributes, One last thing on that I'll mention, and this is something that I've been doing for years, and I think it helps, is that no matter who you are on the team, whether you're the best player or the worst player, sometime during the season, you will contribute to us winning a volleyball match. Somehow, some way, you will do it. Now, as a coach, that doesn't mean you'll always do it on the court during a game. It may be that practice session the night before when you're trying to work with one of your better players to work on some particular skill, and you've asked this player to do some real hard grunt work like blocking or hitting or serving in order to work on the skill you're working on with your better player, and they do it. That helped us win that game the next night. But I think it's important that everybody on that team realize at some point during the season, you will in fact contribute to us being successful. Okay, almost done. 3 key takeaways, which are actually the 3 principles, really. Number 1, athlete needs to feel connected, that emotional tank. They need to understand they are part of something bigger than themselves. The second one, that they can get better. Again, this is the heart of Carol Dweck's work right here, but it's that elm tree of mastery, that you can make mistakes. I want you to make mistakes. It's the only way you're going to push yourself. It's the only way you're going to learn that new skill is by making mistakes. I'll use a real quick example here. Ruben, you're a volleyball coach. You've coached boys at the high school level. In our area, boys volleyball is not very well developed. So typically on the varsity team, what I get is half the kids come out for varsity volleyball as juniors in high school or even seniors, never having played volleyball before in their lives. And you ask them to go out there and make a fool of themselves. And they do. And I like to think that some of that is because we've created an environment where you'll get better. You can make mistakes. But it's so important for an athlete to understand that they can improve, and we're going to create an environment that helps you improve. And then finally is to feel proud about acting with integrity, honor the game. It's again, it's easy to say, it's hard to stand up sometimes and defend it, but they need that key takeaway. Overall, number one thing, if I could do one thing, I always used to joke about this teaching. If you walk out of the school year, here's the one thing I want you to know, whatever course it happened to be, and it's the same thing out of this workshop. Yeah. If there's one thing that you can walk out and do tomorrow, it's working on that emotional tank, getting that ratio bigger and bigger and bigger, more positive than negative. The rewards are there. They can be very quick rewards. That one little comment that you make, if you make more and more and more of them, they begin to believe that, hey, that coach really does believe in me. He really does understand that I want to get better. I need the positive feedback, and then he can tell me what I'm doing wrong, but we're on the same page. Okay. Okay, to finish up, tons of resources. We live in a YouTube world. I joke, if there's something you want to do that's not on YouTube, it probably has never been done before. It's amazing. Not a day goes by I don't find something that I'm a sailor, and not a week goes by there's not something on that stupid boat I look at and go, I don't have a clue how to fix this. And you go on YouTube and there it is. Somebody's got step by step. It's the same thing in coaching. There are videos, there's talks on virtually every aspect of every coach known to mankind. There's the book, the PCA book that hopefully some of you have. It's excellent. It's easy to read. It's a simple read. If you commute someplace and work, it's a couple of 45-minute trips to the city, and you're done. The second part is the PCA.devilonzone.org. Once you've had the workshop, you have access to this. A lot of great information, tremendous information out there. And lastly, of course, Google, which I lovingly refer to as the greatest library in the history of mankind. If you have a question, just type it in, and out it comes. Again, all focused on better athletes, better people. I love that phrase. To me, it really sums it up. End of the day, the evaluation. Please do the evaluation. We as trainers would also like to be just like we've just spent a couple hours teaching you to coach your players. Want to get better. The only way I can make better is make mistakes, but somebody has to tell me what those mistakes are. So please tell me. Don't forget my emotional tank. Feel free to go ahead and pump that up. That works too. But at the end of the day, I encourage you to go out there and do this. Coaching is an incredibly rewarding activity to do. It can be frustrating as all get out from day to day. But as I always remind myself, or my wife does a good job reminding me this, I may come home from a volleyball match and be a little flustered about the results. And I never forget one night we were winning a match, and all we had to do was knock a serve in. Well, of course we didn't. We hit it into the net, and on the way home, my wife reminded me was, Sally didn't go to bed last night thinking, what I'm going to do when it's 13 all in the fifth, I'm going to knock that serve into the net. She didn't plan on doing that. It just happened, So again, get over it, follow the rules, and good luck next season on the field or court, wherever you're at. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Sam.
Oh, my pleasure, really.
All right. I really do. I really appreciate your preparation. You had a lot of information there.
Yeah,
I'm
having a struggle sort of filtering it down. That I can see is going to be a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, I have a couple suggestions. I think when I listen to these and participate in these, a lot of times there's things that you don't see that I saw a couple of your stories, and I think you should switch them somewhere else. Other ones I think are really effective, and other ones I think I would probably skip. Okay. So I'm sure Ruben and I can give you some feedback on that. Sure. I think my biggest question right off the bat, and I'm going to let Ruben start with giving you some feedback, because you do a lot of things really well, Sam, and I really appreciate the amount of time and energy that you put into this. I guess my first concern / question is, how much time were you planning on spending on this principle?
I had targeted 20, 25 minutes.
Okay. Do you know how long you went?
Probably 30 or 35, maybe 40.
Do you know how long, Ruben?
I have them at 38 minutes for the principal, and then 5 minutes for the closing section. So that he definitely picked up the pace in the closing section.
Right.
He did a lot in those last 5 minutes. But actual time within the principal, I had him as 38 minutes.
Yeah, I had about 40, like to 45 to finish up. And unfortunately, this principle specifically, usually you get a lot less than 20 minutes because we might have gone over on other sections of this principle. So I think the key for you, Sam, is going to be to take this principle and really make it concise, but make it engaging and interesting and keeping the folks' attention, because this is at the end of the workshop. So they've already been here for, a good hour, sometimes maybe hour and a half. So by the time you get to this point, again, their attention's starting to wane. They understand the concepts, they've got it. And so there's going to be times, and you'll learn this as you go, there's going to be a lot of things that you put in here that you don't need to say because you've already gone over it before.
Good point.
So that's going to help you cut down on your time.
Okay.
But I don't just want to focus on time, because I think there's a lot of good things that you did here, but that was probably my biggest red flag off the bat, that you are never going to have 40 minutes to do Honoring the Game. I don't know if Ruben disagrees with me, but I've never had 40 minutes to do Honoring the Game in any workshop I've ever done.
Well, the only way would be is if you intentionally, set it up that way, or, yeah. So, no.
Okay, I get what you're saying. I really do.
So,
But go ahead,
Sam,
Ruben.
yeah. Thank you, Kelly. So, Sam, a couple times, twice towards the end of Honoring the Game, you said almost there to us, almost there,
Okay.
and then when you finished Honoring the Game and were transitioning, you said almost done. Why did you tell us that?
I think that's a throwback from teaching, to be honest with you. I've never been able to come up with a good way to describe it. It was kind of like a wake-up call to the kids, and it was just a habit I got into teaching. And a lot of it had to do with there were block scheduling, where you're there for 90 minutes. And I found that the kids needed a few little tick marks to say, okay, we're almost there. Pay attention for another 15 minutes or whatever it was, So, but it's just become a habit. But I see what you're saying. In this scenario, you don't really need to do that.
Well, the reason I ask is because I was wondering if you got the sense that, wow, they need to know that they're almost there because I'm losing them, or they might be bored, or they might be tired, or I was just wondering what was behind that. Sam, you do so many things well as a trainer, and I think that a couple of the strengths that I'm going to point out are actually things you got to guard against too. You're very comfortable in that role here with us. I mean, this is to be on a hangout and to be as smooth and honestly, you just look and sound comfortable in this role. That's a real strength. Because you're so comfortable with it, I think you've got to guard against staying in that mode for long periods of time. Where are you gonna turn the workshop over to us? Where is your voice going to disappear for 5 minutes in the workshop? So
Okay.
it's a strength. It's a strength, and therefore you got to guard against. I mean, the number one critique we get of trainers around the country, when they get critiqued, the number one critique is the trainer talked too much. Okay, and these are good, experienced trainers. They're good, but when it says if there's one way to improve the workshop, less talking by the trainer. So anyway, it's something we're all on the lookout for and watching ourselves and guarding against. And then another strength that Kelly alluded to is just the depth of your preparation, the anecdotes and examples that you brought to this. I mean, so many wonderful ones. Well, which ones are you going to leave out today? Which 2 of the 10 that you shared with us, which 2 of the 10 am I going to bring to this particular workshop? Because Sam, of all the wisdom and experience and knowledge you've gained over your wonderful coaching career, how much of it can you share with coaches in a 2-hour PCA workshop where you've got to cover certain principles and tools? How much of it can you share with us? It's a tiny fraction. It's a tiny fraction. and Sam, I get it in a demo. You definitely convinced us that you know this stuff and that you got, you know, so, yeah, that's.
I hear you. I hear exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay, and then Sam, you said that sometimes you think about or you tell your players, you know, if there's one thing you take away or one thing you remember, it's this. So you did that with us on if there's one thing about the workshop, it's the magic ratio, you know, right? You made that very clear with us in your 5-minute closing.
Okay.
What about within the honoring the game section? What's the one thing, if you want us to remember one thing or take away one thing from honoring the game, what might you boil that down to? And I know off the cuff, it's not an easy question to answer.
I would certainly lean towards teammates.
Respect for teammates?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've always, the trickle down from that, I think, is probably more in their life than it is on a court, but it's significant. Yeah.
So I think if you had 50 people in that workshop or honoring the game, I think 5 of them might have remembered and focused on respect for teammates. I think the other 45 some would have taken away respect for officials, some would have taken away the scenario, you know. So you know, for me, if they leave, I want them to know what roots is, you know, and that honoring the game means respect for these 5 areas, you know. So if I were to boil it down personally as a trainer, that's what I would boil down that section to, and that's what I would want them to all leave with. So I think my point is, Sam, that when you hit us with a lot of stuff, you don't know what's going to stick. if you hit us with respect for teammates and give us a 5-minute respect for teammates experience, then we're probably going to remember respect for teammates, because we don't have all this other, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. All this other stuff that could distract us or clutter from whatever your main point was. So, hey, Sam, you know, you're hearing this loud and clear. You know, I think. Oh, Kelly, can I mention a couple of other things, or do you want to?
Sure. No, go ahead.
I asked you what your goal was. You said was, you know, use the book more, and I wasn't sure what you meant by that. And you know, one way to use the book is to actually get us as participants using the book in the workshop. And so, and I think that's something to think about too, is how do you get us into the book and away from you, you know? So, hey, okay, so I've told you what the first 3 letters of root stands for. Now I want you to turn to page 65, and I want you to read about the T and the S. And I'm going to ask somebody to tell me about, you know, so get us into the book. And Kelly bringing up a place where you can do that, I guess, right, Kelly?
Yeah, Sam, I was just, while Ruben was talking about it, this slide right here is made intentionally for them to be able to reference where these tools are in the book. And you can't go over all of them, because I think there's about 9 of them or something that they mentioned. But actually I'm on the page right now. So there's 1, 2, 3, yeah, there's about, well, there's more than that. There's a lot, because there's a whole section on parents. So you're not going to be able to go over all of the tools with the coaches there, but having them open up the book, and you've got the page reference right there, and, you know, great opportunity, get with the group. And there's some awesome tools here. I'm not going to be able to go over all of them, but hey, can one person in your group look at model and teaching, one person look at their self-control routine, one person look at narrative modeling, and one person look at the parent tools. And I'd like you to take a couple minutes and just skim over that section and then share it with your group. So they know, just reading through here, that, oh, wait, there's some things that, like teachable moments here, we didn't talk about that, expectations, parent meeting, you know, but you've got their head, their nose in the book, so they know where to find things. And maybe they can dog ear a page or circle it or something like that. But is that what you meant, Ruben? Something like that?
Yeah. And when Kelly brought up this slide, you know, boy, some trainers, and a lot of trainers would argue that if they only used one slide in this whole section, this would be it.
Yeah.
It's the tool slide, because yeah, you know, we want how
I would argue that.
Yeah.
I would be one of those trainers that would argue that.
Right. How much of our time do we want our participants actually interacting with the PCA tools? And now your story might bring one of these tools to life. Sure. So here's when I used here's what I do in my preseason parent meeting, you know. But yeah, so getting us into the book and emphasizing tools, I think.
No, by the way, I understand completely. I actually, 3 or 4 years teaching, I used a flip classroom model, which I from your smile, I assume you know what that is. And I just really hadn't thought of it in the context of a workshop. But I hear you exactly loud and clear. I know exactly what that model is precisely. In fact, in some ways, it may be easier with adults. Kids get distracted fairly soon, you know. So, no, I got you loud and clear. It makes perfect sense. Absolutely, yeah. No argument.
Mm-hmm. Is that all you have, Ruben?
Yeah.
Okay. So I get to be the axe grinder now. No, I get to be the tough guy. I agree with everything that Ruben said, Sam. I think, you know, I'm at the point right now where we're getting ready to send you out in front of live coaches. So we've got to say, like, okay, is he ready? And can you take what you did here and translate that into a live workshop? And I think, first of all, the as Ruben said, I mean, I have a lot of things. You can see my notes here, like where I put a green circle around it. I mean, that's awesome. I want you to make sure you keep that in. And the other parts I put, you know, take that out, not necessary, extra stuff.
Sure.
Pull stuff out of us. So I'm going to go through a couple of those things with you first.
Okay.
The parts I really liked was just talking about what is integrity. What does that mean? I think that's really important because first thing is they have to kind of assess their team. Where's their team right now in terms of culture and integrity? And not only, I mean, you brought up a question of, has anybody ever taken over for a program that lacked integrity? But a lot of these volunteer coaches that you're going to be talking to are coming into a team. They have no clue what the integrity is. And if they're not being intentional about creating a positive, strong culture with respect for all of these areas, they're going to let the kids decide what the culture is. And that's scary, to let a bunch of 8-year-old baseball players decide the culture of your team. So that's probably my most important thing with honoring the game is you, coach, are in charge of setting the tone for the culture. And I've stolen from other trainers. They said, you are the thermostat, not the thermometer. So you are to set the climate for your team, not be reactive and turn the heat up or down when things need to change. So I think that's a good way to put it. I love your story. Like, I would think there's probably 2 stories I would keep in what you said. And the other ones, I think I would move them or not even bother. I think it's great that you have so many stories, and I'm glad you brought them in. But I felt like in this section, I know more about you than I had an opportunity to think about my own team. And stories are supposed to connect what you're talking about to me. So I think they're great to use in some ways because I was drawn into what you were saying, but I wasn't thinking about how that would apply to my team at all. So I think this story, I think when you talked about rules, and you talked about how the sportsmanship was all the don'ts. I mean, keep that in. I think that's really important because I always say to my team, or even, you can't do a don't. So stop, because my players will say to each other, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And I said, you can't just keep telling them don'ts. You got to. So I think that was good to keep in there. The story about when you were a kid and you were making up the rules of baseball. You know, I love that story, but think about that. You know, these kids today don't play a lot of playground ball. So they don't get the opportunity to create rules. The rules are told to them. There was a lot of lessons that you learned out on that tennis court with a bunch of boys. You probably had to debate the rules and fight about them a little bit and decide why they were important. And you learned the importance of rules by doing that, where kids today don't have that option.
Got it. Understand.
So I think that's the value. That's where your story, I want to know what's in it for me when you tell a story. And when you told that story, it's like, okay, great, that was a nice story. But what's the point that can make me understand why this is important? The point is that the kids that you're coaching today don't play a lot of free play playground ball. So how can we make sure they understand the importance of rules, not just because it's told to them as something not to break, but something to actually keep the game moving, keep it going, keep it fair. So that would be my suggestion there. I just think you spent way too much time explaining. Because when we get into the principal portion, I personally, and I mean, I think this is what the coaches want. They want the tools. They want to know what they want, the gifts. They want the party gifts. And the party gifts we're giving them are the tools that they can use when they go out. I'm a time geek, Sam.
Yeah.
And so you spent 23 minutes explaining ROOTS. 23 minutes. And then you spent 4 minutes on the tools and the scenario. So if I were you, I would completely flip that. And if you've seen, I know you've seen my demo that I've done, and I'm not saying you have to do exactly what I do.
I understand. Yeah.
But what I know is at the end of the workshop, These coaches are tired. They don't want to hear me talk. They don't really even want to hear my stories by this point because they're like, all right, we know her. We've already had her for an hour and a half. So when I put up the slide that says ROTS, I have cards that I use and they're taped around the room and I get them up and I get them out of their seat right away. Because coaches know what rules are. They know what opponents are. They know what officials are. I don't have to explain that to them. And deep down, they also know why they're important to respect. So I don't have to explain that to them. What I do need to help them do is communicate to their players why they're important. So I want to ask that question right away. Which one are hard for your players to respect? Which ones are the hardest? Okay, go over there to that spot on the wall or whatever. Which ones are the most challenging for you? And sometimes there's an aha moment like, wow, gosh, my players struggle with respect for opponents and so do I. I wonder if they're getting that from me. It's a big moment where the coaches are like, yeah, I'm kind of rude to the officials. My players are too. Maybe I should do something about that. So I'm always looking for opportunities to create aha moments where the coaches are, I don't have to teach it to them. I don't have to tell them. They figure it out pretty quickly. But it's also helping them do work. They're doing work in the workshop by sitting there and thinking, gosh, I never even thought about, do my players respect themselves? I'm too worried about trying to get them to dribble a basketball. But the lack of self-respect on my team is what's causing a lot of the issues. So let's address that first. Things like that to get them thinking. I love, and I'm going to steal with your permission, gravity is the strongest force. I love that. Some have said gravity is the strongest force, but I believe peer pressure is. What a great quote. Keep that in there. That was awesome. It took a little too long to get there because you went through everything else so quickly. The other thing too, I have that in big green. I love that. I think what's a good teammate is a great question, because if you're trying to teach your players how to be good teammates, again, a lot of coaches do the don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. How do we actually encourage them to be a good teammate? I thought that was a great question. The best player, worst teammate scenario is always good to talk about, but not too long, just to get them to think about, why is that best player the worst teammate? What's going on in their head? Maybe their tank is not full. Maybe they've only ever been rewarded for their outcome and their results, that they never even were taught to be a good teammate because they never had to be. Any Carol Dweck stuff, I love the crossover, but I would keep that with Elm Tree because she's our big growth mindset person. So I wouldn't muddy the waters by bringing in a lot of Carol Dweck in the honoring the game principle, because you can use that all for Elm Tree of Mastery. So I would do that. The other story that I think is excellent too, if you're going to keep 3, I think 3 is a little too many still, but is the senior girl that was running with the slower player and the girl didn't even make the team. That is a quick example of a good teammate. And then, you can sometimes ask, would every upperclassman on your team do that? And a lot of coaches would probably say no. I can think of maybe 1 or 2 on my team that would do that, but not all of them. Well, there's my question. Why? Why wouldn't they all slow down and run with the slowest player on your team? Maybe it's a cultural thing, to quote Bear Bryant, maybe you didn't coach them up the way you should have. So, and again, the U.S. women's soccer team video, I think that's good. But again, it was too late in the game. It was kind of too long to put that in. Okay. The scenario, so the actual talking about roots, that should be less than 5 minutes. Less than 5, because I want you to get the coaches talking about roots. Have them share a story about when their players have disrespected an opponent. Have them share a way that they develop respect among teammates. How do you deal with parents that are disrespectful of officials? These are all the real life things that coaches want to walk away with out of the. These are the problems they have, and we're here to solve them. So the tools portion, the double goal coach moment of truth, that's such a crucial slide, because you're giving them the tool. Do you have a self-control routine? Well, I don't, but maybe I need to make one up. Maybe I need to have one. Okay. Modeling and teaching. Maybe as a coach, you swallow your words when you get frustrated after that scenario and you just keep your mouth shut. Well, okay, that's probably good for your blood pressure, but is it good to teach the players and the parents what you're doing? No. Model and teach it. Narrate to the players. Hey guys, I know you're upset. I don't necessarily agree with that call, but we're going to keep playing. Just a little sentence sometimes can, and ask the coaches, what's the difference between me keeping my mouth shut and me narrating through this? And then parents, this is the only part of the entire workshop where we address parent issues. So don't blow it over, because coaches say parents are their biggest red flag every time. What's the biggest challenge? Parents. Parents are crazy. Well, how do we get parents to be on our team? How do we get irrational parents to see our side and help us not be a hindrance? Help parents be an asset, not a liability. So then the last part, we were talking about culture creation. I don't want you to rush through it because I think that's a crucial part of the workshop. So if you save time other places, this is really important. Culture is the way we do things here. The Julie Foudy video is a great way to wrap it up. And that's where you mentioned where you did, I think you did a nice job by explaining that the team right now is actually still getting lessons that they've learned from the 99ers. So I thought that was really good too. And then again, the toolkit at the end, I don't know if I'm quoting you what slide you're looking at. I can share it to tell you what I'm looking at here. This one. This is the tools. This is a quick blip of 9 tools that you've done throughout the whole workshop. So it's kind of a review. So I sometimes just put this up there and go, okay, out of the E-Tank ones, which one will you be using? Which one do you think is the simplest to use at practice next week? And I'll have, how many say buddy system? And I'll have them snap or clap. How many say positive charting? How many say winner circle? Or I might just even put it up sometimes and say, okay, these are tools that we went over today. I know it was a lot of information. Questions on what any of these are. And I'll get, maybe 1 or 2 people to say, I don't remember what rewarding unsuccessful effort was. Or can you explain again what the winner circle was? It's just a quick review so that they know the tools are most important, and you won't get an evaluation back that says I didn't learn anything. The trainer talked too much and I didn't learn anything. So again, these resources are kind of these are the party gifts. These are what you get. You get the book, you get the talking points emailed to you for the next 10 weeks. This is a great, valuable thing that I think by the time you got to this, Sam, I wasn't even paying attention to what it was. But this is really important. This is how they're going to stay connected to the mission. And we're going to give them a reminder email. And it's going to help them have actual more tools in their email that's going to come to them. And then the development zone, I think it was great. Talk about it, your little quip about, everything you can find on Google and YouTube, but I wouldn't put in a personal story about how YouTube and Google helps you because it's already too much information. So, okay. And then the evaluation is for you. So I know that was a lot. Sorry to vomit all that information on you, but
not a problem.
Yeah, I just think you've got so many good things to work with. And sometimes you just need to, a lot of it has to go to the cutting room floor. And some other things have to go to the top. But the one thing I want to challenge you to do more of is get us involved. And just question answer is not involvement, because when you're asking us questions, you're talking to Ruben. And there's only 2 people involved in a room of 50 coaches. So I want to think more. I don't want to just tell you. I want to think about how would I actually use, rewarding unsuccessful effort, or how would I use a winner circle, or how do I deal with the irrational parents on my sidelines? I want to think about that in my workshop and talk to a couple other coaches. They're going to help me because they're in the same boat. They're not going to learn as much by you telling me how to do it. They're going to learn by actually talking to people in the room, or, things like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I get, yeah. Like
Did you have anything to add, Ruben? I saw you look like you were going to add one more thing.
Well, I think there's the editing out, which we all need to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's some things that are edited, and it's like a permanent edit. It's like, okay, it's and then there's other things that are edited out, but they're still there, and you might decide in next week's workshop to swap out an example.
Yeah.
Or in the moment, you usually tell story A, but in the moment, actually. Story E fits better today based on, right. So there's 2 types of editing, I think. One is the permanent edits, and some are the edits that just don't make our core, but they're there.
Yeah.
Just in case.
And some of them I just save too. And if somebody asks a question, like I had someone one time ask a question about positive charting, and I was like, let me give you an example of how I use positive charting. But it was prompted by them. Not by, let me tell you, it was like, I had it. I have a great positive charting story, but I chose not to share it. And then I waited till somebody asked me about it. And then I was like, hey, I've got a great example for you. Let me share this with you. So
how much does the makeup of the group drive what, really, like your point, you might put in or take out? In other words, if it were truly a youth league versus a bunch of high school coaches, or the same sport versus, a lot of different sports. Do you find that you might tweak things based upon that aspect?
Absolutely. 100%.
Okay.
I mean, I 100% of the time, I think, emotional intelligence comes into play a lot in our workshops, because you have to be ready to read the coaches, think on your feet, modify and adjust if needed, really find out what makes them tick and what makes them upset and what challenges they have. And you have to be able to know, like, I've got to insert it or not insert it. You're not going to get this right away, Sam. It's going to take at least 10 workshops for you to go, oh, whew, okay, now I understand what she means. But as you develop, you're going to get better and better at that.
Okay. No, I think I understand where you're coming from.
My number one on that question, Sam, because I agree. I think that, you know, the makeup of the group and your check-in call, and but probably the number one thing is the more experienced the coaches. If we're doing a workshop for high school and college coaches, the more I'm trying to draw stuff out of them, as opposed to telling them what PCA and I think.
Right.
I'm trying to respect the fact that they have been doing this for a while. There's a reason they've been named a high school coach.
Yep.
You know, they know their reality. They've been living it. I mean, nobody knows more about coaching volleyball at your high school than you, Sam. So if I come to a workshop and you're one of my participants, you know, I'm going to tap into that and be respectful of that, and give other participants in the workshop a chance to learn from you.
Got it.
Less of that in a youth sports coach workshop, but still guarding against, you know, just tell.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Yep. And it's also going to be a challenge to get you out of teacher mode too. I think that's a hard part for a lot of teachers, because we're not teachers. We're facilitators, and we're facilitators of knowledge that they have. So it's challenging to get out of that mode, and it's going to be great for you to do it. You're going to have a big growth mindset here to push yourself to get out of that. You know, practice what you preach.
Another Kelly, I've never really thought about it this way. Another way possibly to think about it is that the analogy is that the workshop is a lab. You know, it's you know how in some classes, like in college, you went and there were 3 lectures during the week, and then you went to the lab and you tried it out and you got to do stuff, you know, and you got to blow stuff up, you know, and whatever.
I was a physics guy.
You know,
Yeah.
we blew things up. Yeah. No,
okay.
That rings home, because I taught an advanced AP physics course where Kelly hardly ever spoke. You know, it was, you know, of course I realized real quickly they probably knew more about it than I did, so I shut up. But, you know,
well, and you know what, Sam?
I see your point. A lot of the coaches in that room are going to know more about it.
Same theory. Oh, they all will know more about coaching their sport at their school than you will. Even if you have 25 more years of experience than they do. They know their players, they know their school. And think about elementary. I mean, even if they don't, they know that the league that they're playing in, if it's youth coaches. So draw on them.
Got it. No, this is great stuff. Yeah, it really is.
All right, so I'm going to ask you for your final demo then. I'd like you to pick a different one of the principles, either filling the emotional tank or Elm Tree of Mastery. And I'm going to challenge you to stay within 20 minutes, which is going to be tough, but you can do it. And do some type of an exercise to get us involved, not just asking questions, but some kind of an exercise to really engage us with the tools of that principle.
Okay.
Okay? Help us to practice them at the workshop.
Got it.
All right.
Will do.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Very productive. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Kelly.
You're
Thanks for your
welcome.
time, everybody. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Yeah.
All right. Take care.